Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to our Asian American Pacific Islander panel. We're brought with some really great guests, and I'm so excited for you to get to know them and hear about their personal and professional experiences. All right. So please, T, how about you go first?
I'm happy to start things off. And thanks, Christina, for having all of us here on the panel. Really looking forward to learning from everyone here. So my name is Nguyen. I'm the new and founding executive director for the McCree Center for Life Success here at Mary Baldwin University. So I've been on board a total of 7 weeks. And really just joyful and happy to be a part of the Mary Baldwin community. My background, I'll start with my professional experience, has definitely been in higher education for 22 years and counting, somewhere around there. Most of which is in Chicago, which is still my home base. I'm back and forth between Stanton and Chicago. So I've had stints at Northwestern University, which is kind of where I built my career in higher ed in the career services space within the main career center and their engineering co-op center as well within the School of Engineering. Then moved on to University of Illinois at Chicago, UIC, where I was the director and then became executive director for career services there. Spent 7 years at UIC. So went from a private university selective to a large public urban within Chicago, and then made the move to the Illinois Institute of Technology, a private-based STEM university. And I was an associate vice provost there, which I oversaw many of the student engagement areas, including career services, and came to Mary Baldwin about seven weeks ago. So that's my professional background. Personally, first gen college graduate, came to the US at the age of 3. I'm Vietnamese American. Grew up in the Midwest, grew up in Iowa, and I lived there most of my life. Spent a few years in Minneapolis after my undergrad. Went back to grad school at Northern Iowa, and after that moved to Chicago. And this is where I am now with my my partner and 3 kids. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you.
AnhThu, would you like to go next?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to be a part of this panel. Same with T, I'm very excited to sort of discuss some of the questions that you provided us earlier and just really hearing and learning from everyone else. So I am, so my name is AnhThu Nguyen. I am, let's see, where should I start? Okay, let's start professionally. So for me, my professional background, my early education and career is actually in science. I was trained in genomics, and so I was a genomic scientist for a number of years, most recently at the University of Virginia, leading the Department of Biology Genomics for there. COVID happened and decided that I wanted a shift in career change. And so I have been executive director of the ShenLGBTCenter for about 1.5 years, although I have been a part of the center from its beginning. I was a part of the initial founding board that helped really get this center up and going. So it's been a really special place for me and felt like a very natural sort of next step for me as far as my career. I have been, ever since I came out, have been really involved in social justice and activism, largely around LGBTQ advocacy. And so I've had sort of parallel tracks in my life where I did the science thing, and I also really explored a lot in the equity space. And so I felt finally that it was time to sort of merge those worlds for me. I've really enjoyed being a part of the LGBTQ Center. Personally, I am, my parents are refugees from the Vietnam War and came to the States at the end of, 79. I was born and raised here in the States. They landed in Richmond, Virginia. So I've sort of bounced around from Richmond to Northern Virginia, back down to Richmond, and then have landed finally in Stanton. I've been in Stanton for about 7 years. 7 years? Oh my gosh, that feels like a long time. 7 years now. My partner and I moved and bought a house here. So really looking to put roots down and to really help build out community here. So it's me.
Wonderful,
Thank
wonderful.
you.
And Ammu?
All right, I'm going to talk now. I just wanted to say that all of your stories are actually so beautiful, and I'm so happy to be a part of this. Okay, so I guess I'll talk about my career. So I have a bachelor's and master's in information technology. I would say my current career is digital mixed media design and then marketing services. So I kind of switched from like information technology and software development. And when I got out of school, I kind of realized that I wanted to go more towards web design and mixed media and digital media and things like that. So that's kind of where technology kind of threw me. And currently right now I'm working as a tutor and then also contracting my mixed media services and my web design services out to businesses that, you know, just need help with their online presence, SEO, web design, or overall brand appearance and things like that. So that's kind of where my career is right now. I am a first generation Indian queer woman. My parents came here, well, my father came here in the 80s. My mom came here after they got married in the 90s, and I am 26 years old. And yeah, I think that's basically about me. So,
Awesome.
Very
Thank you so
wonderful.
much.
Yeah, wonderful. If I didn't mention it already, we're also going to be joined by who's going to be helping me moderate and asking questions. And if anyone has questions while we're talking as well, please feel free to ask those questions either in the chat or by raising your hand. All right. Well, here we go.
Let's get started. So we're really doing topics. So I'm going to go ahead and read all of the questions at once, and then whatever you all would like to answer, it's really up to you. You guys are kind of in control of the dialogue. So for identity, our first topic, I have the Asian American and Pacific Islander heritage is vast and diverse. Can you share a bit about yourself and your cultural heritage? In terms of your ethnicity, what gives you the most pride? What are the biggest challenges facing Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the United States today? And do you have any advice for those who are struggling to find their own identity?
I would say that's great questions, lots of questions, and lots to unpack there. So I'd be happy to start, but please, everyone, please jump in. Certainly, I definitely identify, as Vietnamese and Vietnamese American is really how I most identify in terms of my cultural heritage. I think what's interesting about my background is, I'm in a mixed race marriage as well, and my kids are mixed race. And I think that's certainly a big thing that we've had to navigate, actually. And I think we've done it okay. But it's certainly, definitely a part of the background as well. I think what's interesting about me is, in some ways, when you look at kind of the Vietnamese American experience, there's some things that are similar to a lot of folks in terms of when we immigrated here in the 70s as well. I think what's a little different is that I ended up in Iowa, in a really small town. And I think that's definitely helped shape my identity. Growing up in a small town, we were actually we were certainly the only Vietnamese family there, and probably for the most part, the only Asian family as well, within a radius of, I don't know how many miles, hundreds of miles probably. So that certainly was a big part of my identity growing up. And I can certainly talk a little bit more about that later. The challenges question is a hard one. Initially, I pivoted to COVID, and really the backlash that different the individuals and communities really faced. I certainly saw it in Chicago, and I think many of us saw it in the media as well. And I still think we're recovering from that. There's so many other challenges, but as far as something current, I think that really brought it to the forefront in a way that that I hadn't experienced in a while. So that's probably what came to mind first. And then, lastly, as far as advice, I'm a big proponent for counseling. I think that's one of the best things anyone can do. Mental health is so key. I think the other thing is, you got to kind of find your way and your own voice as well. I don't know if there's a timeline for finding your own identity. I certainly would say that I struggled with my identity probably up until my 20s as well. I'm a lot older than that now, actually, but that certainly, took me time. And I think a part of it is how I grew up, where I grew up, who I hung out with, who I socialized with, where I went to college. I think all those things certainly played a role. But I think finding a community that you can grow in, thrive in, finding those mentors are all key in terms of kind of finding yourself is where I would end that with.
Thank you so much for that answer.
I think that definitely relating to the own path. Oh, did you want to go? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying I definitely relate to like finding your own path and your identity, and kind of just finding things that work for you, and whatever you see and relate in the communities, like kind of run towards that, right? And that helps you find more of who you are, because I think that every single person can relate to finding out who they are, but I think that everybody in relating with those relations, you can find the parts of who you are. Does that make sense a little bit? And sort of just running towards the things that make you feel you and at home within who you are. I would say for me, for the other question about the cultural heritage, I definitely relate. I think in my community, when I was growing up, I was probably like one of 4 maybe Indians, and maybe like one of the 2 girl Indians, and then like maybe like 3 or 4 boys. So definitely sort of like felt that isolation in looking at a world in front of me and not really seeing me. And I think that has always been an issue for me in trying to figure out who I am, because it's so hard for me to look around, at least younger. Now it's definitely gotten better on exposure and representation in the world and at least the public community. But I think back then, in the 90s, it was definitely hard for me to sort of see the representation and be like, oh, that person looks like me, or they act like me, or, I can relate, and finding commonalities was definitely a lot harder. Maybe not even like 15 years ago, so definitely like that.
Oh gosh, so much of both what Ammu and T said just resonates. I think there are commonalities, to our experience. I think the isolation and struggling to find representation, I think is a common theme that I struggled with, sort of coming of age and whatnot. So my parents landed in Richmond, where we found actually a really great close-knit Vietnamese community. And then, oh gosh, so I sort of straddle an interesting sort of timeline of my family's history. So my family came in, again, late 70s, early 80s. I was born in the mid 80s. And so I witnessed sort of my family struggling and trying to put roots down. But also I came a little later in that I was able to see them working up through the system and, living the American dream. And then and so much of what that narrative is they saved up and scraped, and we were resilient and all of these things. And then they bought a big house out in the suburbs. And so we moved out to Powhatan, where at that point, it's very similar in demographic to Stanton. We were the only Asian family coming through that entire school system. And so then I lost this connection to folks that looked like me, and during a really formative time in my life. And so that was a piece for me that I really struggled, because I think, especially for our generation, I was struggling to reconcile, oh gosh, the Vietnamese culture, what it felt to be American, and then try to find other representations of who I felt like I was. And I think it's just reconciling all of those pieces took me a long I think I'm still struggling with that, honestly, if I'm being real honest. Carving out an identity. And I think that goes along with some of the advice is that that journey can be lifelong. And it doesn't mean that you don't feel yourself in your early 20s, but just giving yourself time, especially if you don't have those representations, and understanding the nuances and the complexities and the contradictions of you, that takes a long time. And just to be patient, and to T's point, counseling, mental health, especially in at least my experience in Vietnamese households, mental health wasn't really talked about a lot growing up. And so that was my own journey of trying to feel comfortable in expressing myself and finding those emotions and being able to navigate that. So find support in any way you can.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Those were all wonderful answers. Would you all like to speak any more on this topic, or do you want to go ahead and move to the next one?
Oh, I have one more thing to say, if that's okay.
Of course, go ahead.
I think one of the biggest challenges, I think related to T's point, is COVID happened, and that thrust, I think, Asian American identity out into the forefront of dialogue. And it's so hard to reconcile that. And I think Asian AAPI broadly is the largest growing demographic, right, in the United States. But there's such, I don't know if our cultural and societal understandings of Asian American experiences have quite caught up with that, right? And so I think that has led to a lot of misunderstanding of our cultures. And I think that just serves as a breeding ground, I think, for hate and misunderstanding. And so I think that seeing us as a community and as a society navigate that moving forward, because COVID's not going away, and we're gonna have to start having these difficult conversations. So I would say that would be, I think, a challenge that I think weighs on me often.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to head off to our next section, which is the professional experience. And so for this one, they're a little bit more in depth, so we're going to just do one at a time. Go ahead, Em.
All right. So our first one, have you personally experienced the bamboo ceiling in your workplace, and what can be done to transcend the bamboo ceiling?
No, I was thinking kind of long and hard about this one. I'll start with I've experienced statements through the years that certainly have caught me off guard. Yeah, I think where it most resonated is probably early in my career, where there were statements made in terms of how I looked or even my age, then. And so forth. So I started my career, in a kind of a boutique consultancy in the Twin Cities. And probably that is where some of those statements probably had the biggest impact, because you're just starting off, first real job out of college and so forth, and you're trying to really find your own way. And so I think, I think certainly that had an impact in terms of where I think I wanted to go, the trajectory. And it probably was more a statement about the culture as well, more than anything else, that the culture of the workplace. But even in recent years, there's statements that have been made that have caught me off guard. So I'll start with, it didn't happen here, not at Mary Baldwin, but certainly I was in a conversation, with someone once. I won't name anything or place, and they made a comment about how great my English was, and you just don't expect that these days, and a part of you is like, well, how are you supposed to react to that? But I guess my point is, those stereotypes are still out there, and I think we all have to manage those in different ways. So I don't know if that speaks specifically to a bamboo ceiling, but certainly that's been a little bit of my experience in terms of the workplace as well. Certainly would acknowledge, the ceiling, it's definitely there. I think we are making strides, but there's a lot of work to be done.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that answer. Would you all like to move to the next question, or do you want to keep going with this one?
I think
Us?
you could go. Yeah, you could go first, and then I'll go after you.
That's good. I struggled a little bit with this question because I think similarly, I can count or recall lots of microaggressions, lots of statements, lots of othering. I get the that statement of English as well, and for me, it's most often, oh, so how are you from here? How long have you lived here? And it's seemingly innocuous, but it is, I think, it's inherently othering, and so that has always, yeah. But I don't know necessarily if I've had to come up against the bamboo ceiling. I think definitely there is an acknowledgement that it exists, and I think I actually selfishly put in the last question because I think there are stereotypes around what traditional leaders look like, act like, feel like, and I think that contributes to any ceiling that exists, right? In that the model of leadership looks a specific way, and that is modeled out of our society, and anyone that is other from that is going to come up against resistance. And so yeah, that's a tough one for me, so I can't add much there. I'm sorry.
I think you did great. I think I've definitely gotten the where are you from one very often in the kind of way like, oh, where are you from? And I'm like, oh, I'm from Maryland. And they're like, no, like, where are you from? And I'm like, oh, but that's where I'm from, like it's kind of hard to go back and forth. I am Indian and I am, born and from immigrant parents and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I'm Indian American, and where I'm from, like this is my community, and this is how I choose to represent myself. And so that is where I'm from. That was where I was born. That was where I was raised. And even though I was raised in, an immigrant household, and, we grew up with different morals, cultures, like types of things, which we do need to acknowledge, that's still, at the end of the day, I'm still American. And I've definitely always gotten that, that where are you from one. And I've definitely gotten the, your language is so good. Wow, you talk so great. And I'm like, but that shouldn't be what we're trying to focus on. And I'm not sure if I really ever experienced the bamboo ceiling. I have experienced in it was more of a small up and coming business, where I guess I'll just speak my experience, and then I guess we'll just see how that feels. But I think that at the time they had given me sort of a leadership position, as I had been working for them for about 2 years, and they had given me like a leadership position, a new title, and everything like that. And as soon as sort of one falter had happened within our communication style or management style or anything like that, they immediately tried to degrade me and say, well, you're just, a digital media coordinator. You're not even a person worth, a leadership position. Try to take that back, an immediate like step back off of, something small and very, very much like out of step or place. And you guys maybe can comment or maybe tell me whether my feelings are wrong or not. But I feel like in those situations, maybe that could have been a bamboo ceiling thing and try to put me back, in my place of where they thought that I was supposed to be versus where I had already proven that I was meant to be. And I think that sort of is weird, but maybe I could hear your comments on it and then maybe what you guys feel.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned that. I think when we talk about bamboo ceiling, it may not necessarily be like a singular point in time, right? That you hit the ceiling. It's a series of things throughout one's workplace or career and so forth, in terms of where you feel like that you've hit that as well. It may not just be, an event-based is one way to kind of think about it. So all the things that maybe we're talking about, maybe, that's all a part of it, but I think it might be a little harder to define these days in some ways.
Yeah.
I think T perfectly articulated that. I think it's, you know, all these compounding experiences that still reside in you and your mind and your body is that might prevent you from going after the next leadership position or applying for that next like step that feels a little out of reach, right? Because it's been brought to your attention that maybe you've been, you know, taken down, broken down. And so yeah, if I think of it that way, that's actually a really interesting way to frame it, because if I think of it in that framework, that I think has prevented me, I think, from exploring opportunities that feel like my own sort of like imposter syndrome, but not necessarily a part of the bigger system that I'm existing in, right? So thank you for that reframing. I appreciate that.
Those are some lovely responses. Do you guys want to go ahead and move to the next question? Awesome. What are some workplace changes that could/should be made to better support the Asian American and Pacific Islander community?
You know, so this is kind of in my wheelhouse because my background's in career services, and so you know, I've certainly have been to a lot of different workplaces and different, you know, sectors and industries and so forth. And I would say, you know, really varies, right? Because you've got small organizations, you got large organizations, you have corporate environments, you've got universities, education agencies, you know, the list could go on. And so I think it's really going to vary depending upon the type of organization, even where it's located and so forth. But certainly, you know, the first thing that came to my mind is certainly representation is key. You know, I think all of us here would say we're big proponents for diversity in the workplace as well, and representation in terms of who we bring on board, especially in the line of work that I'm in and Christina's in. I think representation is really important when you're working with students. That's something that I think should be first and foremost something that we should be always thinking about. But more broadly, you know, the first thing that came to mind are different affinity groups that may exist. And this often, you know, you'll see this in probably some larger organizations, but I think affinity groups can be a source of support, a source of professional development and mentorship. So that's kind of the first thing that came to mind when I saw that question. You know, a pause there. I'll hand it off to anyone that wants to expand upon that.
No, I definitely understand that. I think for me, I definitely feel the representation, because there's a lot of people still, you know, today that don't understand that Indians are part of the Asian community. And I think when I say that, you know, I click the Asian box in, you know, those things, they're like, you're not Asian, that doesn't even make sense. Like, you're Indian, I thought. And like, the Indians are a part of the Asian community. And I think just that sort of representation, and maybe even, you know, the intersectionality of, you know, combining the different types of communities, or, you know, bringing all of us together to say, you know, this is the full Asian community, and, you know, Indians are a part of that, you know, South Asians, North Asians, like all of it, Pacific Islander, everybody, this is all of our experiences together as people. And I think definitely that could maybe bring some better support within the community ourselves.
I had all of those notes written down. So representation at the leadership level, affinity groups. So, and advocating, I think, for affinity groups and that support. I think that's so important. I had mentorship as well. The only other thing that I would mention is I'm a big policy sort of person. So yes, those things can exist, but they have to be written into workplace policy. That is how employees feel supported most, first and foremost. And so even simple things like your holiday schedule. Can I get a week off after Lunar New Year? That's, you know, having an understanding that how other cultures celebrate, especially Asian cultures that I know, at least in the Vietnamese culture, that is so tied to family and traveling to see family, and having significant time off to be able to do that is important. It's not just a vacation. It is inherently part of our culture and how we navigate our own identities. And so having an understanding at the workplace level and then to write that into policy is the best way for folks to feel seen. And that allows me to be able to show up in my most authentic self. So advocating on all levels, I think, of that are important.
Wow, I just want to say something. I love that you brought up, changing at the systemic level. I feel like a lot of people, want to help as much as possible when supporting other groups, especially the Asian American community. And, instead of just being on that grassroots level, helping, with hands on the ground, thinking those bigger ideas, getting to the system level, changing policies. I think that's significant. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all. I definitely learned a lot from that conversation, especially where I'm in a leadership role, how I can make sure to have those changes and make sure that everyone feels accepted. So really, I thank you. So for our last question for professional experience, we have, how do narrow concepts of leadership and stereotypical traits of leaders/employees limit the ability of workplaces to engage AAPI participation in leadership? Does this impact how you show up as your authentic self in your workplace?
So I'd like to think that I bring my authentic self to the workplace every day. At least I really try to. I think that's really important. I think there are certainly narrow concepts of leadership and and so forth that really exists. I like to think it's getting better. In my mind, I think sometimes it's situational again. And it happens when you're kind of in the moment as well. So for example, you may be in a room and maybe you're the only person of color in the room or one of very few, or in some cases the only person that is Asian that's in the room. And I think those are the times that could really stand out in terms of how you may engage, how you may react, how you may act, and so forth. So I think it's important to be perceptive in those types of situations. I do think we are making strides. I see it where I live in Chicago and in the state of Illinois. So one of the great things, and I've met most of these folks through some of my involvement with some different groups, is seeing more representation in political offices, people holding leadership roles there. In Chicago, we have different wards and so forth, and we're seeing more aldermanic representation of Asians, even our first Vietnamese American representing a certain ward, not mine, but close. So we're seeing that, and at the state level as well. And certainly, when you think about, at the federal level and Kamala Harris and so forth, I think that's wonderful to be able to see that. So I think we're starting to see more of that. And I think, to, AnhThu's point, that's policy as well. It's important to be able to see role models like that and to think to yourself, okay, maybe these are the kind of things that we need to be doing as well, from a representation standpoint, a policy standpoint, a governmental standpoint. So I probably got a little off kilter there in terms of that question, but I had to get that out there. So.
Yeah, I definitely related to that for sure. And I feel so definitely when I try to show up as my most authentic self when I come. So I now live in Los Angeles, California, and the people I work with, I think, are definitely, I guess, the representation is higher here on the different diversity of people. So I think in that sense, it's definitely on a more modernized scale. But I think when I was in more of a smaller environment, smaller area, smaller town, I was constantly trying to basically go through my intersectionality as a woman, as an Indian, and as a queer woman, and how I show up in the workplace. And I know Christina has talked about code switching and sort of how I show up as who I am, but it's only once I first sort of make sure that I feel safe in whatever environment I am in. And there's no way that I can, turn off being Asian or turn off being who I am in any sort of the way. But I think that I always just try to come forward and make sure that I feel safe in the environment, and then try and show, exactly what I want to choose and what I choose not to show. I think that's important as well.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up code switching as well. And while we're still on this professional experience kind of page, I want to kind of dig a little deeper about what it feels for you all to maybe be the representation when you walk into a room. How does that weigh on you? Do you feel that you have your whole culture to be representing through you, or do you find that you're just a person playing your part? I can go deeper into that question.
Yeah, that's a good question, Christina. I think it varies. I'll admit there are times that I don't think about it. I mean, you're in the moment. You're in a meeting. You're in a whatever, and you just don't think about it. But then there are times where I'm a little bit more observant, and well, it's often maybe after the fact, and you're like, okay, I am a role model. There is some representation here, and that's important. So it's in those times maybe where, for me personally, where I have a chance to slow down a little bit, that is when I have the chance to kind of reflect a little bit more upon that. I've certainly have been in situations, working within a university setting where students have come up to me, and, those that have been either from Vietnam as international students, or Vietnamese American, they wanted to talk with me when they saw me either in a public type forum speaking, in some type of university setting and so forth, or they saw my name somewhere. So those are the times when you're like, you think, okay, this kind of matters. And and that's when you feel like, okay, you've got a job to do in terms of representing, and a chance to mentor as well if it comes up, and to be a leader. So again, I think it's somewhat situational, but it's important.
I agree. I think the responsibility is ever present, and that is always going to feel heavy. And that's because I think I don't know. One of the earlier questions is, what gives you the most pride about your heritage? And it is because I do feel so fiercely responsible and connected to my community, and to be able to represent it in a way that is, that honors it. It feels important. It feels really important. And I think, to speak to Ammu's sort of note about intersectionality, I think particularly being a queer Asian woman, a queer Vietnamese Asian woman, I do feel an additional responsibility, especially being in leadership at an LGBTQ center. I think that responsibility is a good thing because it keeps me aware, self-aware. But I think for me, historically, I'm a classic overthinker, right? And I think you can overthink your way into being this role model, or what you think should be the role model. And I find that that's not for me, just because I think the struggle that I've had is around the concept of how the stereotype of Asian women generally is portrayed in society, right? And that has been, I think, counter to how I individually feel. And so working through what that is. So, I think most folks, the broader generalization of Asian women is that they tend to be a little bit quieter, they tend to be more demure. And I never felt that way. And so just tying it to sort of the earlier question and, you know, the concepts of leadership. I think when folks were looking at me to be a leader, they wanted me to be a leader that maybe wasn't who I felt I was authentically, right? I might not be the strongest voice, the loudest voice in that room. And I've experienced this in social justice spaces, nonprofits, and in academia as well. I think people look and had this expectation of, okay, you're this leader, I need you to be out and loud and proud and all of the things. And I played those parts because I felt like I needed to, because that's what I felt like other folks wanted from me. And that didn't feel authentic to me either. And so I think it's been this journey for me to like unlearn what was expected of me as being socialized as an Asian woman, what feels authentic to me, but also learning in these new spaces. I'm learning just as everyone else is, and trying to figure out who the hell I am. That's also its own journey. So, but I think what I always land on is if I show up as my most authentic self, that allows everybody else to do it in whatever way they can as well. And so it has nothing to do with actually how I show up. It's the environment that you're creating around you, which is really important.
I definitely relate to that. And I think that, I guess we are the representation that other people need, because I think that if I had seen somebody like me when I was younger, I would have felt more comforted and more, you know, at home within myself, seeing that there was somebody out there doing this, which was exactly what you said, unlearning who I was told to be and sort of relearning who I wanted to be and showing up as that person every day. So I definitely relate to that for sure.
Stina digging deep.
Excellent. And y'all are giving me exactly what I need. Oh my gosh. Yes. Feeling the soul. All right. Would anyone like to touch on anything else, or does anyone have any other questions about professional experience?
I mean, I think one of the hardest things to figure out in the workplace is culture. You know, you can go to an interview and do all the research you can, but you really I don't think you get a good sense of the culture until you're actually there. You work there and you experience the day to day. And I think that's really a hard thing to assess. But I think, you know, a lot of people have said it, you know, culture trumps strategy all the time in the workplace. And I think, you know, you want to kind of consider that as you're navigating where you want to be, what roles you want to grow into as well. I think those are all really important things in terms of one's professional experience, and certainly one's identity, how you view yourself is important. I think the last thing I'll add, and I haven't talked about this for a long time, I think, you know, when you talk about your professional identity, you know, it's a very kind of Western construct in some ways as well. But it is often how we identify ourselves in Western culture in the United States as well. You know, and obviously, as we've talked about today, there's a lot more to it than just that, but it is pretty big and at the forefront in terms of identity in the United States and Western culture.
I think that's a great point. Really, really great point.
Right. Okay, and so now we're going to head to our personal experience. Em?
Awesome. So for our personal experience, our first question is, what are some meaningful cultural traditions for your family?
Well, for my family, Lunar New Year is certainly the big one. The red envelope. The kids want money, more money than normally, you know, I'm willing to give out. That's for sure. But that's a big one. I mean, we certainly try to really celebrate Lunar New Year and decorate the house, you know, in a way to celebrate Lunar New Year. So in terms of cultural traditions, that's probably the big one for us, and a fun one.
Same for me. It's my favorite time of year. It's just such a hopeful, celebratory time, and it's time with family, and there's an incredible amount of food, and yes, there's money floating around. I'm an auntie now, so I'm like struggling to pass out the red envelopes too. That's new. I'm used to receiving them. So
Yeah.
that's been a fun journey. But Lunar New Year, there's such a rich food history, I think, to the Vietnamese culture, and those are my favorite times.
I would say probably for my family, it was definitely the Onam Festival, which is actually supposed to be the New Harvest Festival in Kerala. So that happens in September. So that was definitely like a Hindu festival. That's probably like the #1 Hindu holiday, I think, for most South Indians. So I think Onam was definitely that. And we would always do flowers and set up like little petal flowers outside of our door. So that would always be there for the full month of September. And then there would usually be a feast and celebration and everything like that. So that's definitely the biggest cultural tradition that I did as a kid.
Awesome, thank you. Does anyone else want to touch on that question, or do you want to move to the next question? All right.
Wait, before the next question, sorry. Does anyone want to share, since we were talking about food, does anyone have a specific, favorite food that you kind of that just brings back warm memories of like childhood?
Oh, I think it varies from day to day.
Fair.
I love, as for, in terms of, my own heritage, I love a great bowl of pho. The broth and stuff, a good banh mi, good Vietnamese sandwich is always, those are the things that are probably my go-to that I get cravings for. And certainly I've been known to order those for lunch on occasion, when you just get that craving, you're like, oh, I'm not making anything, I'm just going to order it. Those are probably my two go-to foods.
What about you,
Mine
AnhThu?
is definitely
Oh,
like,
sorry.
oh yeah.
No, you go.
Okay, mine's definitely rice and dal and chicken curry. Probably like all the types of curries, but that's like the one that is probably like my staple meal. It's definitely like rice, chicken curry, dal, and then sweets. So that's kind of like what home is for me, because I grew up, just eating Indian food in the household. So that's kind of like my comfort food. Like, this will make me warm inside for sure. That's it for me.
Oh, I love this question. So any of the Vietnamese soups, honestly, whether it's pho or bún bò Huế, I think bún bò Huế is my favorite. And I have so many memories of my mom, just because those soup stocks stay on for 12 hours, maybe longer. And so the entire house is perfumed with it. And it's just, and you also, when you cook for an entire army and village of folks. So it was you knew that you were going to be eating that for days. And it just is such a source of comfort. And also I think, as I've sort of been on my own journey of reclaiming a lot of that, those have been the best things to learn to cook as well. So anytime, and also there's not any great Vietnamese food, I think, so I have to unfortunately cook on my own. But that, and there's this kind of very rustic rice sort of porridge called chow, that is, the second you get sick, if you get a tummy ache, your mom was making that. And it's just, again, very rustic ingredients. It was rice and broth and maybe some ginger and onion, but just the texture, just the flavors, just the smell is just home for me.
Making me hungry. That's what it's doing. So.
No, that's so amazing. Everyone has a different love for food, right? And especially combining that with cultural, ties, I think that's a beautiful thing. I'm quoting it now, the ratatouille moment you have when you just take a bite and it's like, all right.
No, I definitely agree with T. I'm very hungry now. So our next question is, what is a challenge related to your ethnicity that you have overcome and you are the most proud of?
Gonna switch it so abruptly.
For me, I don't know necessarily if I've had to overcome anything. It's just a deeper appreciation for my culture and my heritage. That took some time. Like I said, I keep alluding to that. I think it's natural to have periods in your life where you explore certain aspects, especially for me, like I was exploring certain aspects of like queerness before meeting my Vietnameseness. And so I think just coming to a really beautiful place where all of those things can exist inside me and make up the uniqueness of me is, but nothing that was negative and needed to be overcome necessarily, but just a deeper appreciation.
I loved how you said that. I really liked that a lot.
Yeah, I would say in many ways similar. It's hard to kind of articulate, maybe a specific challenge related to my ethnicity that I've overcome, but maybe more so a series of challenges, some small, some bigger. I think, in terms of what I'm most proud of is certainly just, where I'm at professionally, my family, to be, I think we have my family, personally, we have some very, I think, progressive values. It's and so forth. We live in a pretty progressive neighborhood in Chicago as well. So, those are the things, that I enjoy and, that I'm proud of. I think just to think about, this is a little bit maybe more about the immigrant experience, but to think about how I grew up and maybe how many of us grew up and where I'm at now, and what I'm able to, what we're able, provide our kids and so forth, and their experiences in terms of culture and openness and understanding, I think is something that I'm really proud of as well. Yeah, I think that's kind of what comes to mind.
Yeah, I definitely am definitely proud of where I am now, and also understanding that I'm a part of the culture of the ethnicity of who I am, and all of the steps and strides that I've done as a person is all for the culture and for what I can do for the community. And I think just keeping on going every single day and putting my best foot forward, that's really what creates pride within me and being here for that.
And so I want to go a little more into that question as well. And not necessarily, and I know the way the question's phrased is kind of like that, the notion of, Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders being the so-called model minority, kind of a little different from the professional experience per se of like, do you find that there are challenges within your life that have come about due to societal's kind of pressures for you to be the model minority?
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, have we kind of felt that pressure individually or from others to kind of be that model minority? Is that kind of the question, Christina?
Yes.
Okay. I think my family, so growing up, I will say this, my family's pretty unique. I didn't feel the pressure per se in terms of you had to do this, you had to do that. I mean, there was questioning from time to time. I mean, I remember when I decided I was going to leave my job at the consultancy that I worked for and go to grad school, they're like, why would you do that? And so forth. So they were pretty worried at that point in time. So there are moments like that. But I would say the pressure, certainly some of it's probably, for me anyway, more of the internal pressure I put on myself from time to time. There is certainly that. But as far as, the model minority, or you had to be something, I think I was fortunate that way. I didn't really feel that. And I would say for my siblings too, we didn't necessarily have that either. So I think that's probably speaks to my parents to a certain extent, and how they raised us and so forth.
I think for me, there's this interesting sort of correlation between, I think, the immigrant family experience and then societal sort of expectations as a model minority, right? And they're essentially the same, I think, if you're thinking of how to deal with those pressures. And I think so much of, oh gosh, my poor parents, so much, I think so much of our dialogue, I think growing up, being in an immigrant family, was this gratitude for being here and for being in this country and for finding better opportunities for our family. And so that with that comes the responsibility of being the best version of yourself, for your family, for your community. And so it's that, and that's complicated, I think, to untangle, because I think you feel that internally, but also feeling the external pressure of when someone, just because I look the way I look, people have maybe a preconceived notion of what I'm able to achieve. Untangling that's difficult. But I think, I don't know, I feel like most of the Asian Americans in my life have used that as a transformational sort of superpower, if that makes any sense. Because I think, and you can hear it just from the other panelists, we're all immensely proud of what we've been able to accomplish. And that is because of how we've been raised, that is our culture, that is the family, and all of those things. But it's also hard to untangle that from other, right? But it's okay being proud of where we are. I think I am immensely grateful for how I was raised. And I think for me, I have felt those pressures most often when I've been at a crossroads where something didn't quite feel in alignment with my life. And I've had several sort of benchmarks throughout my life. I think the most recently is being in a really well-respected position at UVA and, on this track, but then realizing maybe that wasn't the right path for me. And then going into nonprofit world, which is not the most stable and supportive. And, I got the same question as T, is like, do you want to do this? Like, is that what you want to do? And then I think those moments I've felt that pressure of, I'm so grateful for my position. I'm so grateful for what I've achieved, and does it feel irresponsible to give that up? Right. And I think that's part of the model minority myth, where we don't get to be messy. We don't get to make mistakes. We don't get to fail. We don't, it's of course we do. But those pressures are felt differently, I think, in Asian bodies. So I don't have an answer to this question at all, Christina. I'm so sorry. I'm just musing, but
No, that's okay. It's pushing dialogue. That's all I want.
No. Yeah, I definitely feel like the success, I think like redefining what success is like to yourself will help take a lot of that weight off. And I think that, as a child, my family definitely did have a specific definition of what they expected me to be, or how they expected me to show success to them. And I think that I had to sort of change that and redefine my own success and say, hey, this is who I am as an authentic self, and this is how I can be successful as my authentic self. And, this is still success, just in a different way, maybe not the original definition that you had created for me. And I think that also just helps take the weight and pressure and sort of move it in a different direction.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. That was a really good question, Christina. So for our last question, for personal experience, we have, what advice would you give Asian American and Pacific Islander students in finding appropriate representation or concordant mentors in their communities?
My first thought is it's a journey, that it never ends. And in some ways, I think it'll change through time as well, based upon your circumstances, certainly where you live, where you work, all those things, right? I think they play a role. This is something that I've actually struggled with from time to time, even in recent years, as far as finding mentors for myself as well. I've one of the things I've struggled with is certainly, okay, how do I connect better with the Vietnamese community, with the Asian community? How do I do it in a way that works for me? And I think I've done it, in different ways. Hasn't always been through traditional volunteer work or anything like that, but it's been through some board work that I've done for a Vietnamese organization here in Chicago. I'm a member of a network as well that I think has given me some connections and potentially some mentorship. It's called the Asian American Executive Network. It's a loose organization, but I'm a member there, and I've certainly been involved with some of their programmatic elements, and that's how I think I've stayed connected, and that works for me. Will it work for me 10 years from now? I don't know, but because I hope to slow down. That's my goal. But we'll see. So that's why I say it's a journey. So.
Do you want to go next?
I was like, you could definitely go if you wanted to. I think for me, it was just kind of sort of going back to finding what you connect with and then running towards that. And that's kind of where you'll find, the mentorship, or even the representation that you need, finding those little pockets and pieces that you really relate to, and then trying to find a community within that. And then also for the representation part, it is definitely always a journey. And I think that even you can find mentors just in places that you're not even looking, So I think it's just an everyday sort of thing where you just continue to just go and see where you can find what you can find and what groups you're a part of, and just kind of try and be a part of the community. You have to show your vulnerability to get that vulnerability back, I think. And I think that sometimes we're scared to do that, but the scariness is good, and that can help, move forward, and things like that.
And so, sorry, please. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to agree with everyone. And it's a journey, but you're not going to necessarily find the one mentor that might not exist, and maybe it does, but be open to finding, this is exactly how Ammu said, is finding different pieces that you find value in and you find alignment in. If I think about the mentors that I've had across my life, they have been surprising. So I love that you said that, and that this is not what I had anticipated. And I think, historically shied away from it. But lessons show up and they come to you as they need to. And to continue, it's a continuous process. Most of what I've learned in my identity, I've done in community. I've done with mentorships with others. And that has been really a powerful practice. And so that would be my advice, is to find as many folks and surrounding you that can support you in any way, and whatever that can be personal, can be professional. You need both, definitely. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Excellent. Does anyone have any other questions relating to personal experience? I do have one question, and I don't want to go too far down a bunny hole, because I know we're already kind of an hour in. I want to respect you all's time, but do you have when talking about representation, especially representation through the media, is there maybe a statement that you want to say, a myth to break, or something related to you that you want people to know about you and your community?
A tough question, Christy.
That's a really intense question, Christina. Okay.
Who wants to go first? That's not me, that's for sure.
That's a really hard question. You're good, Christina. I'm not sure. I don't know. I gotta. So myth that you want us to kind of demystify about our own communities or self or identities.
Yeah, either of the ones. And I know it's a very in-depth question.
Okay.
or maybe even something that you've seen, like a stereotype that you've seen through the media that you just want to put a stop to, you know. For example,
Well,
I know there's a lot of intersectionality on the panel, you know, of like of queer individuals, and you know, things like how queer people take up space, you know, and use their space, and that, you know, drag queen story time isn't isn't hurting anybody, you know. Like I just wanted to give you kind of the platform to kind of say something that, you know, that you can speak to.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think we're at a stage where, you know, there's a lot of different intersectionalities. I think if you look at my family, you know, it's a multiracial family. I have a child that identifies as non-binary, is openly out. You know, I think maybe that helps break maybe a stereotype in terms of just what a family should look like and so forth. In turn, is what really comes to mind. I think that's the first thing. It's hard for me to kind of say in terms of just purely Vietnamese American identity. I'll be honest, I'm struggling with that. I don't know. I mean, I want to make a good bowl of pho, but I don't know if I can. I talk about it, but it's a lot of work. I don't know. So, yeah, so I'm kind of struggling. I'm struggling with that part of things. I think the one thing is, you know, I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, but there's so many regional differences too. That really can play a big role in terms of your identity and what things look like. You know, I have a family, you know, in a lot of places around the country, Houston and Seattle. And every time I'm in Houston, it's a whole other world to me in terms of the Vietnamese culture and the food and the people. Like Chicago's a big place. And you know, Chicago's bigger than Houston population wise, but the Asian Vietnamese community doesn't even compare to Houston. It's minuscule compared to Houston. And so that, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it just kind of blows my mind when I'm there in terms of just the effect that it has on one self and so forth. Yeah. I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but I'll end it with that. So
No, that's great. That's great.
So you're saying again, like just break the mold of, you know, maybe some sort of stereotypes towards the things. Well, I will say, you know, as a child, there was always the, you know, Indian 7-Eleven, Dunkin' Donuts type thing. And I will say that's not a real thing, that all of them are owned by them. But I will say that I've gotten that so much throughout my life, like that it's ingrained in my brain now. So maybe I can just break that mold and be like, just stop. Let's just stop it, because I don't think it's a thing, and we should just maybe, that shouldn't be the first thing that comes out of your mouth when you ask somebody about who they are or, you know, what they represent. Not a 7-Eleven. So, okay, that's it. I think.
I love that you went there, because I thought, okay, what is the stereotype of Vietnamese Asian woman? And it is being at the nail salon, right? I think that's the broad stereotype. So I never like to, I think for me, I always want to add more to the tapestry, right? Like I want to add more to the nail. I want to add more nuance. Because honestly, I have lots of members in my family that own nail salons, and they are the most badass folks, fierce folks. And so it's not that I necessarily want to break that mold. I want to place value there, right? Historically, that is the only place folks have, the Vietnamese community has been able to obtain businesses and to find, and to build a life for themselves. And so, I don't want to remove that narrative because especially, well, again, I'm speaking specifically for Vietnamese immigrants that have come to the States. It was difficult. They had to find whatever footing that they needed to survive and to care for their families. And so for me, it's like, I want our community to just be as weird as we want to be. And that in whatever, we don't have to, I just want it to be weirder. And I was really excited when the film Everything Everywhere All at Once just swept, right? And it was this like really incredible, really strangely weird sci-fi movie about the Vietnamese, or not the Vietnamese, they're not Vietnamese, the Asian American sort of immigrant experience, but there's a queer storyline as well. But it was weird and it was beautiful, and it was just, I want more stories like that. I want just more. And I think, I'm okay leaning into the stereotypes if we need to, if that's what we need to move forward, but there's just so much more.
That's a great movie. Definitely a great movie. Very weird, but great movie. So,
Very weird.
Yeah, I definitely second you on, having representation of, many cultures be seen not just as the quote unquote sad story, or someone just being, a beeline character or just to fulfill someone else's storyline. And so more Asian people in the front center, of telling their stories in their authentic way. So I think that's wonderful. All right. And so let's lead into questions. And we'll be wrapping up pretty soon. So any questions from any of the attendees in the audience?
What is one thing you wish you could say to your younger self?
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna start crying. It's to be gentle with yourself. It's what you're feeling is real and what you're feeling is valid. But it gets better. It gets so much better.
yeah, I almost would second that. You're gonna be okay. I think that's what I would say to my younger self. So
Yeah, I definitely would third all of this. You're gonna be okay. You're valid, and just keep going day by day. You're gonna make it, and everything's gonna be good. You're gonna be on the other side of it, and there's something else behind that door. So just keep going.
Nice. Any other questions? Feel free to say them out loud or even write into the chat. And we'll wait for some of those panelists. I just want to say thank you again. I know we had you all send some questions in, but did any of you have questions to maybe ask one another or to just bring about? Not based on any particular category, just kind of off the rails, any question.
I just say I hope to be able to meet everyone here on this panel. That it'd be wonderful to be able to do something like this again, or obviously connect individually and so forth. I've really enjoyed it. So,
and I will
I
say,
thought we could totally exchange emails and keep going. Sorry, Chris.
no, I was saying while we wait for some of those questions, the best thing about like Heritage Months is just to put a spotlight on these cultures and these different lived experiences. But we all know very well that it's not just May, right? That you are feeling pride. It's all year long, and I feel like a lot of people can identify, within their own culture and their own experiences that, a month doesn't dictate when I should be proud or or when people should recognize. I think a lot of the Heritage Months are mostly an American thing, I will say, like very Western, that's trying to put people in those boxes. And so while we are in May celebrating Asian American Pacific Islanders, I definitely want these resources and, you know, these conversations to go way beyond May, to go all year long. All right.
Absolutely. Yeah. An amazing conversation. And thank you to everyone. Thank you, Christina, you know, for helping moderate and put this together. So.
I agree. Thank you so much.
It definitely got me thinking, and this is good thoughts about it all. So I enjoyed it for sure.
All right, probably have time for one more question. Emma, is there a question in the chat? Oh, you're muted.
My bad. So we have a question from Christian, and he says, did you have any role models growing up? If so, what about them made you look up to them?
I mean,
Gonna be really-
oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm going to be really cheesy. I get this question a lot, and I never know how to answer it because I didn't consume a lot of media growing up. And so I didn't necessarily I don't have a lot of like TV or celebrity sort of role models. I think for me, my mom has been just this pinnacle of grace and strength and resilience that has really been for me. It really has been a North Star for sort of how I've navigated my own life. So I think, it's mom for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly I probably consumed way too much media growing up, actually, to be honest. But certainly, certainly my kind of the same vein, my both my parents, but my dad especially, in terms of kind of the perseverance and what they went through and experienced and what they gave back what they lost as well. I think that's probably resonates. In terms of the media, I really have to kind of think about it. I think the one thing I'm not going to name, there's too many folks that I could name. I like sports, and I certainly I used to follow music. It's hard to keep up now as I've gotten older, but those individuals that have been persisted and lasted and persevered, I think are those that I've looked up to, growing up and now as well. So.
Yeah, I think as a child, I definitely relate on the parents' role model because I was constantly I was consuming both American and Indian media. So I saw a lot of representation of myself within the Indian media versus the American media, which I didn't see really any. And so it was hard for me to find role models within that community because I was here in America, though. So I think that kind of sort of gave me my parents as my role model. It's mostly my mom, but also my father as well. Just about how hardworking they were. And that definitely gave me the push to just, be who I was and continue on being who I was and just keep continuing to work at who I am and then create my own success for myself. So I think that they were definitely big role models. I will say Priyanka Chopra was a role model for me a little bit because I saw her a lot in Indian media because she was a Bollywood movie star before she moved over to American. So I kind of saw I guess representation in her and how she also, moved forward and kind of integrated herself into the American community. So that was definitely a role model for me as well.
Right. Well, thank you all so much for being here and participating in this panel. We've heard from a lot of different stories and, lived experiences. And one thing I just want to leave with everyone, for everyone to take with them, is that even though cultures are, different, our paths are very similar. We go through a lot of similar experiences, whether it be your parents not wanting you to change jobs or, in akin to a different food, right? So what's important is that we are connected, and having dialogue to promote that connection is super important. So again, thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yes, we really appreciate all of your answers. And like what I think Christina said, she said it great. You all did fantastic, and I really hope we can do something like this again because I learned a lot, and I hope the students watching this in the future will learn a lot as well.
Right.
Thank
Great.
you so much for this opportunity. This is going to be an incredible resource.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you.